Welcome to the Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories at the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey in Seagirt, a partner of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Today is March 5th, 2018. I am Carol Fowler, Director of the Center. My honored veteran today is retired Colonel Jorge J. Martinez, who served in the New Jersey Army National Guard from August of 1975 until January of 2011, and is considered a Cold War veteran and one who supported Desert Storm, post 9/11, and also the global war on terror.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Colonel. Thank you for wanting to be here today. Your eyewitness account is considered a primary historical source and a valuable contribution to the Veteran History Project. And welcome.
Oh, thank you.
And you were referred by Captain Thatcher.
Okay. Yes, I ran into her at a recent event, National Guard, and she asked me if I would participate, and I was very happy to do so. Yes, indeed.
I'm happy to have you today.
Thank you.
Okay, 1975. Let's go back before that. You're from Cuba originally.
Yes, ma'am. I was born in 1953, lived in Cuba until 1968, and I was able to leave the Castro regime with my aunt November 1968. I migrated to Spain, lived in Spain for about 7 months, and then I was allowed to come to the United States as a political orphan, which means that your parents are in a country that doesn't have the option of travel, and I was coming to the United States without my parents. So I was considered a refugee, political refugee for immigration purposes. So I came to the United States in June of 1969, and I have been here ever since.
Okay. Had anyone in your family served in the military?
Not in the American Army. My grandfather fought in the Cuban Independence War in 1895, which is known here as the Spanish-American War, and that's it. And no one else in the family has served in the military, other than now me.
So how did you come to serve in 75?
I've always liked the military. I migrated to the States, went to school here, graduated here. This is my home. I had a lot of opportunities that I wouldn't have had in my home country. So I decided that if I'm getting all these breaks, I might as well give something back. And family situation would not allow me to go active duty because my family depended on my income to my aunt that lived with me was single and was elderly, so I needed to be around the house to help out. So the Guard presented a great perfect situation where I could serve the nation, pay back a little bit of what I was getting, and still take care of my family. So it worked out really well, and was a perfect combination. So I joined April of 75. That's when I actually first got exposed and started the paperwork to come in, and then I started basic training in August 4th of 1975.
So it's kind of like you just described your motivation.
Yes, ma'am.
The Guard, so you could be stateside for your aunt.
Yeah, it created a situation that allowed me to serve the nation, take care of my family, and have a life Monday through Friday, in addition to wearing the uniform on weekends and whenever it was required. So it was like a perfect match of conditions for us.
Mm-hmm. And why the Army Guard, not the Air Guard?
Well, that was I'm going to say that was just pure chance. I was attending a school in Teterboro Airport called Teterboro School of Aeronautics. It's a technical school where you earn yourself, you get the education and training to take the Federal Aviation Administration's exams for being an aircraft mechanic. And I was nearing the end of the 2-year course. The National Guard flew in a couple of helicopters to do a static display. I got talking with the crew chief and the crew, and came to learn that I would be able to join the Guard and do everything that I wanted to do as I just described. So I figured, hey, this is the perfect time. I'm finishing school. It was 1975, or right after the fuel crisis, and the jobs were not that available, so the timing was perfect. I was able to join, go to the basic training, AIT, come back, and then eventually get a job in aviation, which also worked out. So it was just, if the Air Force had been able to fly a helicopter there and give me the same pitch, it would have been the Air Guard instead of the Army Guard. But it worked out that it was an Air Cav unit, which was the only one in the state at the time, and I think has only been the only air cavalry unit in the state of New Jersey's history, and it was just perfect timing. So,
You mentioned basic training at AIT. Let's talk about those locations.
Okay.
And if it was some kind of, to go from civilian to military life, if it was an adjustment for you.
well, the basic training took place at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. So I had never been out of New Jersey since I came to the United States, so it was a different environment as far as traveling and getting to the South, which is a whole new mindset other than the Northeast
Right.
cultural mindset. People were very nice. Basic training is basic training. Back then, you lived and died in fear, but it worked out. Where fear of the drill sergeant, let me clarify that.
Oh.
No fear of my life or anything, just fear of the unknown, and then being there, being hollered at like they do what they used to do old school. But it was hot because it was August, but I went for Cuba, so I felt at home. That was not the issue. It was fine. It was fine. I just left my country when I was 7 years younger, and I was used to being away from home in new places. But this was my choice basically. So I was kind of I'm going to say maybe tentative or a little apprehensive of the unknown, but not necessarily fearful of my life or anything. So it worked out well. I was there from August through early October. I was in the 3rd platoon. We were honor platoon every week except 1 week, and folks were there from every state just about and every walk of life. So it was a real good exposure as the rest of the nation. How people think and how people behave different than New Jersey or New York. So that was very educational for me. And then I went to AIT in Fort Rucker, Alabama. That was from December through, from early October through early December of 1975. And I trained as a helicopter crew chief mechanic. The course was self-paced. I had just finished all my aviation training on the civilian side, so it was kind of a walkthrough as far as it wasn't too difficult. On the academic side, it was just getting used to military life and continue to get used to the drill and ceremonies and living in the barracks, etc., etc. It went pretty well. It's usually a little more than 3 months course. I was able to finish it like 4 weeks early because it was self-paced, and since I had some of the background already, it helped out really well. So again, in the South, different whole mindset altogether other than being in New Jersey. It was 50 degrees and everybody was complaining about how cold it was and had already been here for a while, so it was interesting. But that was it. And then after that, I came back home and started to drill my unit in early 1976.
What was happening in the country at the time?
The first fuel crisis had happened in the 1972-73 time frame. A lot of aviation jobs, a lot of jobs have been lost. General Ford was the president. Remember that whole whip inflation now because there was a button, lapel button called WIN, and that was one of President Ford's things to get the nation motivated to try to get industry and inflation under control. President Carter was running for office. Backlash from the Vietnam War was pretty hot. Veterans were not being treated as they should have been, and everybody still had long hair. And disco was going into being as a major force, cultural force. So I remember having platform shoes and long hair just like the rest of everybody else. So. And I used to play in a band, so I stopped playing in the band because I didn't have long hair, and
right.
So one of the things you started to not fit quite with the times because you had to show up for drill, fit for duty, and with the right haircut. But I remember some of the folks in the unit that were in the last years of their avoid the war in Vietnam time, that would wear a wig to drill to cover their long hair. That was interesting, but that was not the majority of the folks, but there were some folks that couldn't wait. And there used to be a saying in the National Guard when they went to annual training, LFC, last freaking camp, because they just couldn't wait to get out. And now that the war was basically coming to an end and there was going to be no more draft, they couldn't wait to get out of the army. But there were other folks that were looking forward to joining the new army because they knew they weren't being forced to it and they were going to be able to make a choice. And so, as a young person, I wasn't too attuned to what was going on politically, but you know, it was also Watergate, post-Watergate time, so there was a lot of different things happening in the nation that were kind of shaping where we are today. Because a lot of those young people are the ones that are running the country now. And, we're not doing a very good job in certain areas, but in other areas, I think we have done great things. So.
And you mentioned President Carter coming up, and that would have been kind of like the beginning of terrorism in our mindset as Americans.
I would say
With the hostages?
maybe for the nation overall, I would say yes. Terrorism has been alive and well since forever. You know,
Right.
in 1950 there were Puerto Ricans that walked into Congress and tried to blow up the place. You know, there were attempts in Algeria. They were killing, and Congo they were killing politicians and leaders left and right from the early 60s. So it's just that sometimes culturally the nation doesn't pay attention to what's going on outside.
Sure.
It's a
Right.
little too late. But I think terrorism has been alive and well as long as we've been on this earth in one shape or other. So,
So you mentioned coming back to New Jersey to your unit.
yeah.
Was that Troop D?
Troop, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Troop D Air, 5th of the 117th Cavalry.
And where was that located?
Westfield, New Jersey, ma'am, initially. The peculiar unit, because it was the only, it was AirCav, which is a very unique type of organization. Cavalry squadrons are considered to be somewhat of maverick personalities, and within the CAV squadron in the old days, the aviation, the air troop soldiers were considered more maverick than the ground guys, so there was always a lot of competition. There was a certain degree of, I want to say, professional jealousy, because the troop commanders, which is the company level command on a cavalry squadron, are all captains. But back then, the commander of the air troop was a major, and all the platoon leaders were captains, because usually in a ground unit, the platoon leaders are first lieutenants or second lieutenants. So because of especially at the time, the perception was aviation demands more experience and certain talents that sometimes not everybody has, and that's just a comment. Every level of command and responsibility was one higher rank than the regular ground units. So there was always a lot of back and forth about that, and the fact that we were getting flight pay and et cetera, et cetera. On the enlisted level, the unit was great because it was self-contained, self-deployable, self-sustaining. We had 40 infantry guys that were part of our security team, and they were cavalry scouts. Old MOS was, I think, 19 Delta. We had a mess section, we had a communication section, we had a command section, we had an operations section. We had a maintenance platoon that took care of the ground vehicles. We had upward of 50 ground vehicles, and we had, I think it was 27 aircraft. So we had another maintenance platoon that took care of the aviation. So in today's term, to put it in perspective, this unit had 201 soldiers, authorized strength, and they were pretty much capability-wise and equipment-wise, they were the equivalent of what is known today as the General Support Aviation Battalion. We also had a lift platoon, a gun platoon, and a scout platoon. So we had our own attack aircraft, we had our own scout aircraft, and we had our own lift aircraft. So
What type of aircraft?
at the time, they were all UH-1s, except the scout platoon that flew 086s, like the ones that you have out here in the air, the one that you have out here in the air, on the grounds. Yes, ma'am. There were two types of Hueys. The early gunship, UH-1 Bravo, Charlie or Mike, which is the one with the short doors, and the UH-1H, which is a troop-carrying Huey that lasted until a few years ago. That was used for troop carrying, and in some cases, I know the units that were the medevac aircraft. They were the predecessor of the UH-60 platform. So.
Oh, okay. And you enjoyed the work? You were good at what you did?
I don't know if I was good at it, but I did enjoy it. That top to my platoon sergeants. I worked in the maintenance platoon first, and then I was asked to, they have vacancies on the flight platoons, and I guess my leaders thought I was good enough to be a crew chief, so I became a crew chief. So I flew with the aircraft for roughly, I'm gonna say maybe no more than 2 years. And then
Where would you fly?
we would fly during drills. On the weekend, we would fly out of Linden Airport. That's where the aircraft was stationed at the time. We would report to Westfield for first formation, and then get in our cars, drive to Linden Airport, get the mission briefing for the day, get the aircraft ready, go fly. come back, have lunch, go fly some more if the weather was good, and then come back and get the aircraft ready for the next day, and then do the same thing on Sunday, weather permitting, unless there were other mandatory training, such as maybe weapons qualification. So in that case, we would get in the aircraft, fly to Fort Dix or wherever the range were, land, we get picked up by the trucks, go to the range, fire, get back in the aircraft and fly some more. So it was interesting. We would fly, depends on the amount of time and the weather, and whatever we were doing training wise. Some helicopters, some pilots needed to fly, practice their instrument approaches, which is a different type of flying that flying when the weather is good. Other soldiers, the gun scout teams would go maybe to Lakers training area or up to High Point, State Park in northwestern New Jersey to do tactical flying. And sometimes we would do formation flying, and the younger pilots that needed just proficiency flying, they will do a cross-country flight for them to learn how to navigate, plan the flight, calculate the fuel, etc., etc. And then everybody gets back to the airport somewhere around 1500, give or take, and then work on the aircraft for the next day to be ready. So.
Did you ever do a cross-country flight?
I did a couple, yes ma'am.
You would have to stop a lot, right?
Well, the aircraft only had enough fuel for about 2 hours and 40 minutes best. So you always had for a day where the clouds were not a factor, the weather was not a factor, you could fly up to a 20-minute reserve. If you had to go in the clouds, which is called fly under instrument flying rules, you would have to have at least 30 minutes of fuel reserve, or enough time or enough fuel to get to your alternate airport if you couldn't land at your intended landing spot first, and plus 30 minutes. So we never planned any flights that was longer than 2 hours to ensure that we had at least 30 minutes flight reserve. So in this general area, a 2-hour flight will get us to DC, Washington DC area, Baltimore area, upstate to past Albany, from Trenton pretty much, past Albany or maybe Binghamton, New York, up to a little bit past Indiantown Gap in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and going to the east, just about Groton, Connecticut, and Rhode Island state line pretty much. And then we would have to stop, get fuel, and we were helicopter pilots, we would say we stop for fuel and directions to know how to get to our intended spot, and then go to the next spot. So longest flight I've done, I'm gonna say maybe Virginia and Fort Drum. I had several cross-country flights going like to New Mexico and so on to pick up aircraft, and I ended up having to back out because I needed to do other things. Not that I wanted to, but the job that I had required other things. So you get to do what you're told, not necessarily what you want to do. So.
Okay. Can you describe your duties while you're in flight? Your particular duties? Well,
when I was a crew chief, my duty as an enlisted person, my duties was to ensure that the aircraft was ready to perform the mission that it was assigned, perform any preventive maintenance or minor maintenance, anything that will break in flight, to ensure that we could continue our flight, ensure that the passengers that we were carrying were properly briefed and secured in the aircraft and knew what to do in case there was an emergency. And if there was an emergency, part of my responsibility is to ensure that they got out safely and went to a safe spot so we could take care of the emergency. Ensure that the pilots were behaving properly, I guess for lack of a better term, and that there were any issues up front that they would need my help with, I would assist them. And when flying, if we were flying close to the trees or in the crowded area, ensure that before they turn the tail of the aircraft anywhere, I would be part of the crew coordination would be to ensure that the tail was clear of any obstacles before we turn the aircraft anywhere. And if we were flying crowded airspace out of habit, we would always ensure that the aircraft was clear in the direction we were turning it. Mm-hmm. In flight, if there was something going on, respond to the emergency, keep everybody safe. In a routine flight, if we noticed any traffic or anything outside of the aircraft that might impact our flight path, I would have to call it up, let them know, and then we go from there. That's about it.
Did things go smoothly?
Most times, yeah. Sometimes it would be minor glitches. As an enlisted person, I don't think I ever had to do an emergency landing because something was wrong with the aircraft. As a pilot, I had a couple of minor emergencies that came up that were not significant. If you do what the emergency manual says, you usually walk away without any problems. So I was lucky enough never to have anything significant happen to me.
So where were you stationed after Westfield?
Well, Westfield I was in the CAV unit as an enlisted person. I came to OCS, and after graduation, I went back to the same unit, which is usually not what happens. But given that there are only so many aviation units in the state, and
Where did you go to OCS?
here in Seagull.
Right.
I was class 22 from June of 1978 through July 78 to June of 79. I think I commissioned in June 3rd, 1979.
Is that when you became a pilot?
No, that was part of the process. I guess might as well go into that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I was an enlisted man when I went to AIT, which is where I learned to be a crew chief in Fort Rucker, Advanced Individual Training. The command put out a call to the schoolhouse asking anyone that was interested in taking the warrant officer aptitude test for flight school. And I wanted to fly, so I took the test while on active duty sometime in November of 1975. Then that paperwork got taken care of. I think the minimum score at the time was 300. I had a 317, so that made me good enough, eligible to go to flight school if I passed my flight physical, etc. So I took the test, forgot about it. In 1978, there were rumblings that the Army was going to allow National Guard folks to go to flight school straight from the National Guard, warrant officers, and perhaps some officers. So I started to kind of perk my ears up to find out what was going on. 1978, May of 1978, we were doing annual training in Fort Drum, and one of our aircraft crashed, and 4 of our people got killed. Four soldiers from the Squadron 3, from the air troop, and a medic from the headquarters troop. And that kind of, put a damper on everything. Obviously, there was a whole aftermath of that influenced how the aviation program evolved in New Jersey. But at that point, I was still an E4, and the way things evolved after that crash, there was a lot of turnover in the unit, just because the timing not necessarily tied into the accident itself, but that triggers. It happened at a time where the other actions were going on. A lot of the captains that were Vietnam vets were coming out for major. They did not want to stop flying, so their career was going to come to an end. So rather than get out of the military altogether, they decided to revert to warrant officers so they could stay flying. So in the unit, and the CAV unit at the time, there were, I'm going to say, 12 captains. And out of the 12 captains, I think at some point between 1978 and the time I commissioned in 1979, we ended up with 1. So the major in charge, when I came back, when I got commissioned, I was assigned to one of the units in the squadron, but not the air troop. And he went to the squadron commander and asked the squadron commander to assign me to Delta troop, the D troop, so to help him kind of put together, keep the unit going, number one, and to give him time to put a team of captains together that could fly and help him run the unit. So the argument was, well, he's going to be an armor officer because he needs to be in an armor unit. And the counter argument was, that's fine, but at this point we need people that can help me run this unit, and if you don't have aircraft, you can't do your mission. So I don't know what the argument ended up being. Bottom line was that I was transferred to Delta Troop to be almost like the ground executive officer for the unit, while the major found and the command found enough people to take the place of the captains that had left. Major rationale was, we know he's a hard worker, he knows the people, he knows the unit, so the things that we need him to do, not necessarily have him involved flying, but being able to help us with administration of all the other things, so the people that are flying can remain flying and do the other jobs. So it worked out. I got to learn a lot of other things not related to aviation, as far as command, staff, administration, logistics, personnel. And while that was going on, I finished my branch. I got branched as a armor officer, And while that was happening, I learned that the flight school now was open to the reserve components and the National Guard. So I started to, well, actually that happened before. I had to correct that timeline later. But I had applied for flight school. So when I waited for flight school, I did all this work, and it took roughly, from the time I applied for flight school to the time I went to flight school, it took roughly 2 years, because it was a long waiting line because everybody wanted to go to flight school, and then there were only so many positions. So during that time, I basically was, effectively, I was the executive officer for the unit, so I got to do a few things. The most interesting one in that time frame was that the unit deployed by itself to AP Hill, Virginia, Fort AP Hill, Virginia, to do its annual training. And I was tasked to be the convoy commander. So as a second lieutenant, that was kind of an interesting experience. I learned a lot. The 5th of the 117th Squadron, as far as I know at that time, had never sent any unit by itself anywhere other than Fort Drum or Fort Dix. So we were the first unit in the state, as far as I know, that went to AP Hill, Virginia, by itself, without a squadron, battalion level headquarters oversight, and anybody else other than a very small slice that ended up being at AP Hill to help us with some of the logistics. But the actual movement and preparation was all self-contained by the air troop. And I got lucky enough to have a great bunch of NCOs that helped me get down there in one piece. So it worked out really well. And then right after that, that was in the spring of 1981. And then in late 81, that's when I received my orders to go to flight school. And 2 weeks after I got married, so that worked out really well.
Where was flight school?
Fort Rucker, Alabama.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, Fort Rucker is kind of the mecca for aviation in the United States Army. It's also where the Army's Warfighting Safety Center is. When safety actually became a safety center itself, it was determined, since most of the folks that were more involved with safety were all aviation guys. They left everything in at Rucker, and I think remains that way. So.
So after flight, you came out of flight school, and where did you head after that?
I came back to New Jersey, back to the air troop, and at the time it was, I think my first assignment as an aviator was in the Aero Scout platoon as a section leader, because I was a first lieutenant. I flew Hueys. I was in the Scout platoon, but there wasn't enough capability to qualify me into the 086 aircraft at the time. And when I came back, the platoon leader from the lift platoon, which is where the Hueys and the 19 Deltas were, had just reverted. So I think it was Major Mike Smith, Colonel retired now, Mike Smith was a troop commander at the time, asked me to become that platoon leader. And I ran what was called the Aero Rifle Platoon, or Lift Platoon, for a couple of years. That platoon had 5 aircraft. I think we had 14 pilots or 11 pilots, 5 crew chiefs, and then I think it was 40 or 44 19 Delta cavalry scouts. And our job as the aviation guys were to take these scouts and put them out in the field as listening posts or observation posts, so they could relay enemy activity back to us or to the CAF squadron, so they could know where the bad guys were during any type of military operations. So that was a very everyone but me, I think at the time, was a Vietnam veteran. Oh. So I got to learn a lot from the best. I was never as good as they were, but definitely I think my flying was much better because of the people I flew with, both enlisted and officer and warrant officer. They were fantastic people. So.
Did you ever keep in touch with any of them?
Oh yeah.
That's wonderful.
Because of the way things evolved in my life, I got to work with some of them full time. So that, and today, we were both retired. We still have dinner every once in a while. So there's a few people that I've been able to keep in touch with. So it's good.
Great.
As a matter of fact, one of the gentlemen that flew one of the aircraft that went to the school that I first learned about the National Guard, I flew with him as a crew chief. I flew with him as a pilot. I was his boss. I was his co-worker.
Oh.
And we're still friends to this day. So.
It's amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
I'm a blessed person in many ways. That's one of them. Some great friends, and I got to learn from the best. So it's fantastic. So,
That's good.
okay.
So all those locations were the same as when you were in Westfield the other time?
Yes and no, and more transitions. It's always upheaval in the military. Also, in 1978, after we had the crash, there had been a construction of Army Aviation Support Facility at Picatinny Arsenal, which is where the new home of the aircraft squadron, aircraft troop was going to be. So it just coincided that right after the crash, between the month of June and September, the Linden Airport site where we had all the aircraft ceased to exist, and everyone moved to Picatinny. And that created a kind of an operational quandary of sorts, because the headquarters for the unit itself, the orderly room, remained in Westfield, but 90% of the unit was up at Picatinny. So one of the reasons that I got also asked to be the XO is because I would stay at Westfield and cover all the administrative and logistical aspects of things that needed to be done at Westfield, while Major Smith and the other captains that were now in place in some of the platoons were able to orchestrate the transition into the new place, setting up operations and learning the local flying area and everything else. It kind of worked out pretty well. But there were many weekends where, the commander at the time would go to Westfield in the morning, drive to Picatinny, take care of business, come back to Westfield in the afternoon for a meeting, and then do the same thing all over on Sunday. So there was a lot of driving involved. And in my case, I had the same situation. Every once in a while, I would have to either go to Picatinny in the morning, drive to Westfield in the afternoon, and it was just part of the weekend.
What town is that again?
Picatinny Arsenal is located in northwestern New Jersey, next to the city of Dover, township of Rockaway Township. So of exit 35A or 35B on Interstate 80. And that facility, which was called Army Aviation Support Facility Number 2, the first commander there was Colonel Retired Bob Pierce, and the facility itself was dedicated to the crew that got killed in May of 1978. One of the folks that got killed in that accident was Captain Rick Applett, which was a full-time technician, and one of the folks that was supposed to be at that facility when the facility was completed. Him and Colonel Pierce were supposed to be the people running it. So Colonel Pierce ended up being the one to carry the ball, and Major Mike Smith, Colonel Mike Smith, and Colonel Pierce are the ones that kind of moved everybody up there. There was also Colonel Retired Mike O'Connor, Major Retired Charlie O'Connor, his twin brother. They were all involved at the time. They were all officers at the time. They were part of that move, as well as Colonel Retired Barry Bellman, Colonel Meyer, which used to be the State Army Aviation Officer at the time, and a few other folks. Right now their names escape me because it's a lot of them.
You know a lot of people.
I know them. I don't know if they know me, but I do know a few of them. Yes.
Okay, so then where did you go after that?
All right, so I stayed in the aircraft troop for quite a while. Actually, I served almost 16 years straight in the CAF squadron, some sort of the other. What happened was the big troop that had all these aircraft in the year 1986. There was the Army put out a concept called the Army of Excellence, and that became effective in 1986. At that time, I'm pretty sure it was 1986 because it took a couple of years for the Guard to implement it. 1986, we deployed, with the whole squadron deployed to Fort Hood, and after the Fort Hood deployment, the units were reorganized, and the air troop that was Troop D Air actually became 2 separate air troops.
What did you do at Fort Hood?
The squadron deployed to train as a squadron in a new tactical operations area. The deployment was very interesting because it was the closest that any unit at that time had gotten to do an actual total loadout and relocation. For the air troop, that entailed a lot of training because we had to, I think we moved 14 aircraft from New Jersey to Texas, but we didn't fly them because it wasn't economically feasible. Plus, part of the concept was to help us load the unit out as if we were going to Europe. And obviously you can't fly a helicopter that only flies for 2 hours across the ocean without crashing and dying. So for us it involved about 6 months of pre-training, and what we would do at Picatinny, we would show up on a weekend, get in the aircraft, fly up to Stewart Air Force Base in New York, Newburgh, New York, land at the Air Force National Guard, at the Air National Guard base there, where they had a unit of C-5A Galaxy aircraft, which are, at the time, were the biggest asset that we had to move aircraft. We would land with 6 aircraft. We would take the aircraft apart. We would load them into the C-5A as if we were going somewhere, and then we would load them out again, put them back together, and fly them home, which is what we were replicating what we would do at Fort Hood or any other site.
I didn't realize you would have to take them apart.
So, as I was saying regarding the training involved in Stewart Air Force Base, we will fly up there, take out the aircraft apart, work with the Air Force personnel on loading the aircraft and securing the aircraft, and then we would take the aircraft out again, put it back together, and flying back to Picatinny, and then do an after-action review, make sure that what went wrong was addressed, what went well, that we made sure that we kept it into our procedures. And there were significant, about 5 or 6 personnel that were, during the week, actually went away to Air Force School to become loadmasters. Because the Air Force, the way things worked at the time, the Air Force would not do any of their weight and balance and load plans for us. We would have to do it ourselves, but we had to certify it. And the only way to certify it is to have an Air Force trained loadmaster. So our folks went to their school, got certified, and that became a really a very productive, I think, period in the unit, because everybody had to really bear down and work together more so than we were doing before. When we got to Stewart Air Force Base, everybody pushed, everybody took things apart, everybody had a duty to do. So, officers, warrant officers, enlisted, whoever it was, everybody knew what they needed to do there, especially as part of the crew. And you were responsible for your own aircraft to be ready to go. Airworthy to fly there, be able to take it apart, help put it in the aircraft, secure it, and then take it apart, bring it back out, put it together, and fly it back home. So it was very a great team building experience, more so than, we were pretty tight before because of the crash. We became more a very efficient team when it came to do that. So while that was happening on the aviation natural flying portion, on the ground side, we were doing the same thing. We were having to ensure that our load plans were, we only had so many containers, and we could only take so many vehicles, so we needed to ensure that the equipment that we were taking was really what we needed, that it was working, that it was packed properly, so it would fit in on the containers that we were given, and that we maintain control of all the property, sensitive property that we had. So that was very good training for everybody, because we didn't get to do that all the time. When we arrived at Fort Hood as a squadron, we were the aircraft. Most of the troops flew out there in charter aircraft. The air crews that were with the aircraft, we flew to McGuire Air Force Base. We did the same thing we had done at Stewart Air Force Base as training, and the Air Force was very happy with the way we did things, because we didn't break any of their toys, and we didn't break any of ours while loading the aircraft. And then the air crews and the personnel involved in the loadout from aviation all jumped in the same aircraft, the same C-5A where the aircraft were, and there were 2 C-5As that flew out from McGuire to Fort Hood. And then when we landed at Fort Hood, we did everything in reverse. And then we flew from Gray Army Airfield, which is the major airfield at Fort Hood. We flew to North Hood Airfield, which is where our bivouac site was going to be. And then we went to the field where we were operated for, was nearby North Hood Airfield. And then we went ahead and set up and started operations. The squadron took a couple of days to get settled. The ground vehicles that were used during that annual training cycle were loaned to us by the Texas Army National Guard, and we had a lot of maintenance issues. So the ground maintenance personnel got a really significant workout and exposure to doing everything, because it looks like the Texas folks didn't give us the best toys, but they knew we were paying for the repairs, so we got to do a lot of the work, and they got a lot of new parts from the New Jersey budget at the time. So,
Oh, okay.
but it is what it is, yeah, just life. So the intent was at the time we were going to basically run our operations, and sometime in the second week we were going to do, at the time it was called a force on force. Our sister's active duty squad was going to basically run an operation against our squad. And at some point it became I'm going to say, from my perspective, it was one squadron commander wanted to one up the other squadron commander. So it was an interesting period of learning good leadership skills and good leadership traits, as well as bad leadership skills and bad leadership traits. So it was challenging, it was interesting. It helped me shape how I did my job in the future, and show me many things that I needed to avoid to be an effective leader. So
Such as?
such as not helping get your people motivated, and not abusing your people physically or mentally, and not placing your unit behind your personal interest. Just typical what happens in every job. We just got exposed to it in a different manner. So I learned a lot of what good things to do and what not so good things not to do. So everybody meant well. Everybody was trying to do their best, but some people weren't equipped to do their job. So that just happens, and it happens every day, even today. So for me, as a younger officer, I was just a captain at the time. He helped me because knowing that this new reorganization called the Army of Excellence was going on, I knew I was being considered to be the next commander of one of the aviation units. So it helped me prepare for that command in many aspects, emotional, tactically, professionally, and being able to keep a team together through a stressful period of transition. So it worked out.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's always something good, even
Such as life.
Yeah, exactly. Just life 101, exactly, man. So
July 86, Liberty Weekend.
yeah, that was good. That was good. We had just been back from Fort Hood maybe 3 weeks. So one of the things that we learned in Fort Hood is that you really can't count on other people to feed you. So
What?
well, it was just, there were some of the things that happened during the event, that a few meals were missed during the annual training because of miscommunication or miscoordination or incompetence. Just happens, okay? So they asked for volunteers, and it wasn't Liberty, it was the reopening of the statue. That was 1986. I'm sorry, I got confused.
It had been closed since 84.
Yes. So when it was being...
President Reagan was there?
Yes, ma'am. The National Guard was running, helping the state police and so on, and Colonel Singleton and the state headquarters and the 50th Armored Division at the time all had a significant presence at the state park, and they had a command post set up with the rest of the government agencies. We were asked, the aviation folks were asked to provide medevac support to the state police in case it was a mass casualty event. So there were 2 aircraft assigned to support the state police. One was out of Picatinny and one was out of Trenton.
So where were you exactly?
I was at Picatinny. So with the morning of the 4th of July, I flew from Picatinny. We had to be on the ground by 7 o'clock in the morning, if I remember correctly. So I flew from Picatinny to Liberty State Park, right by the train station, where you get the ferry. There's a strip of
Jersey
land
City?
there. Yes, ma'am, in Jersey City. We landed right by the old train station, and we set up our aircraft there. There were...
That day was the largest flotilla of tall ships to assemble
Yes, ma'am.
in modern history
Yes,
down the
ma'am.
Hudson River, battleships and sailing ships.
Yes, ma'am. The USS Iowa, if I remember correctly, was anchored and upstream from the statue in the Hudson River between the George Washington Bridge and the statue. And when that was one of those sites that you remember. I remember flying basically up to this George Washington Bridge because we had a prescribed route to fly in, and we had certain codes that we need to have on our radios to make sure that we weren't going to be shot down. because there was a lot of security at the time. Everybody was concerned because it was such a big thing.
Because the president was there?
And everything else, the mass gathering of aircraft, the different nations that were there. I'm sorry, of ships, not aircraft.
The French were there too.
Yes,
the
ma'am.
French president.
So the security awareness was pretty high, even by today's standards. So we had given certain call signs, certain codes we needed to use, which we did. But we needed to fly basically to the George Washington Bridge, make a right at the Hudson River, and then stay below 500 feet, if I remember correctly, and then go land at Liberty State Park. So as I turned, I was one of the flyers. Captain Jim Dormoth and I were the pilots for that aircraft. As we turned right on Hudson River, this AI while you're sitting there, beautiful. I remember that it took me, and we were doing about 60 knots, I think it was. It took me about a minute to fly by the entire aircraft. That's how big that thing was. And then we basically landed, and we didn't fly because we weren't supposed to. We were supposed to be just backup. So we stayed there the entire day. We were at front row seats for the entire event, and then about 10:30 at night we flew back to Piccadilly. So
the largest fireworks display in American history at the time in the world.
Yes, ma'am. I remember.
You were there for that?
I just was. I took, I think, 9 rolls of film that day.
I wanted to ask you if you were able to take any pictures.
I have pictures. I have a picture that I actually have on my phone that I'll show you later, that I was able to take a picture of my aircraft with the Twin Towers behind it at night. It's a really nice shot. And I lost the negative a couple of years ago, and I'm really upset because I never got to blow it up. And I have a bigger picture of it, but it's a really nice shot. But it was a very eventful day for us in many ways. As I mentioned to you, we were kind of leery or cynical about who's going to feed us, and they had told us you're going to get fed. Well, we ended up bringing 2 coolers of sandwiches and water and Coke. There were only 5 of us. We had enough food for, I would say, 3 days. And it so happened that Governor Kane stopped by to say hello. He ended up having a Coke with us. I think he even had a sandwich. We have a couple of pictures with him. But it was great. It was great. We were there all day. The Air Force, the French Air Force, I guess Blue Angels or Thunderbirds opened the show. They had a whole beautiful streak of red, white, and blue smoke and everything, and they were no one was supposed to be flying other than them. And then all the boats were there, all kinds of festivities. I remember that the Adjutant General, New Jersey, got involved in bringing a child from Midwest somewhere that had terminal cancer. And the General Gerard and his people, and the boy and his family got flown to the Statue of Liberty just before President Reagan arrived. That kind of created an interesting situation, an anecdote, I guess, of a significant impact with me, because there was some miscommunication. During the 80s, aviation in general had a series of aircraft accidents where people got killed, where the chain of command had not been totally involved in the missions. So General Munson at the time, mid-80s, had sent a series of messages where ended up that every aviation mission had to be specifically detailed as to what you were going to do, how you were going to do it. And it was called a briefing and brief back. I would tell you, you're going to fly from point A to point B, you're going to do X, Y, Z, and then after you got told of that, you had to basically recite the same thing back, and everything would be in writing. So before I left, my mission briefing was, you to fly your standby medevac for the state police. That is your mission. Other than that, you know where you need to go if something happens, but other than that, you don't move from there.
Right.
So, unbeknownst to me, again, communications, the other aircraft, which came out of Trenton, for the Nagar, had a different briefing. And there had been arrangements to fly this sick child to the Statue of Liberty with media, civilians, and the Adjutant General. The other crew and the other aircraft was Major General Glenn Reith, former Adjutant General at the time, he was a captain, and CW5 retired Rick Andrews, which was a full-time pilot at the Trenton facility. So, we didn't know it. We just knew that we were backup for my crew, and I was a pilot in command, knew that we were not to move unless something bad happened. during the course of the day after Governor Kane came by and so on, one of the must have been at the time the general's aide or somebody from the PAO office in the Jersey Guard stopped by and tell me he's here. I said, hey, great. So I said, who's he? He goes, the general. I said, great. Tell him to stop by. We'll say hello. So I will bring in the kid. I said, what kid? The child. I said, okay, bring him over. So the family comes over. We show him the kid, the helicopter. We took pictures with him and the helmet and so on. And then the lieutenant reminds me, hey, well, he's ready to go in 5 minutes. So I said, go where? I said, to the Statue of Liberty. I said, nobody's going anywhere. This is what I mean. I said, my orders are, my briefing is, and the president is flying in the next minute. You fly, you're going to get shot down. So
That's right.
he says, well, you know, he's going to go. I said, well, he's not going with me. So and then while this is going on, General Gerard shows up. He goes, why are we not running? I said, sir, I can't take it. What do you mean? Don't you know who I am? I said, sir, I know who you are. And I also know that my mission brief says this is what I'm going to do. So he was obviously, there was some miscommunication. Well, not embarrassed. I may be embarrassed, but you know, you don't have a captain to a colonel, you're not doing something.
But he's a World War II ace. He should know about
But
mission briefs.
he's also a two-star general. And from his perspective, and I understand that everything has been coordinated, which it just wasn't communicated. So
But was it coordinated with, you know, the governor, the president?
it was,
everything?
but I didn't know that because
was.
I wasn't part of the, you know, it was one of the things where
Somebody screwed
community
up?
creation, it would have been, it ended up turning out okay, but what happened was, as this situation is escalating, because I'm being told I have to do this, and I'm trying to explain to the general that the president is flying,
Right.
and he's telling me to tell the Secret Service that he wants to fly, and I said, sir, the president outranks you.
What?
So I asked him to wait because I kind of realized that the other crew was a full-time crew. So I got on the radio and I called Captain Reith at the time, and I said, hey, sir, what's going on? So what I mean, I said, General Gerard is here ready to basically fire me.
No.
Because, he goes, what do you mean? He said, well, he's got this whole crew here. So I'm not flying civilians. I can't fly the media because we're not allowed to. And the general is asking me to do something that I really can't do.
I see.
So he goes, oh, we got it. We're supposed to do that. But he's like a mile away from me. He's in a different landing area. So he had the codes. He had the information. So I hear his helicopter cranking, and I go back. Hey, sir, you know, try to explain my way out of a real tight spot. I said, sir, it's all taken care of. The aircraft that I'm supposed to carry you will be here in 30 seconds. And he wasn't a happy person, but I think he realized that there had been some miscommunication. So he didn't fire me, luckily, and he got in his aircraft, and since the other aircraft had all the correct information, no one got shot down, and it was a successful day for everybody. But it was an interesting moment for my military career that would have resulted in other
That's very
things.
interesting. My mind is going to tag Gerard to tag Reith. Is there any connection?
No, at the time.
Was that
well,
incident?
actually, I'm sure there was a connection. Not as far as the General Reith becoming the tag, but at the time, General Ken Reith, I think, was Assistant Adjutant General for the National Guard, or might have been one of the top-ranking officers in the Army Guard. General Reith, Captain Reith at the time, was a full-time employee at the Trenton Mercer Airport facility. So it stands to reason that if the TAG has a mission, and most of the missions to support the Adjutant General aviation-wise usually came out of Trenton because they were closer to Lawrenceville, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
They had a larger fleet. So I can see, I mean, back then when I was being hired by the general, I wasn't really seeing that, but now that I'm a little older and I learned more as me working with the organization, chances are that the mission came, all those approvals have to come from National Guard Bureau, and the coordination with the Secret Service and everybody else has to be done prior to. So I'm sure all that was done, but the issue was, hey, well, the Picatinny guys are not in the mission, we don't want to, you know, certain information you don't want to divulge to everybody. So they don't need to know. So all we knew is that, but when the aircraft got placed, yeah, and I understand all that. My biggest fear was that General Gerard wasn't having any of it. and here's a low captain telling the general, "I'm not flying you, sir."
Did you actually use
Yeah.
the words, president and could have been shot down?
I used every possible word that I could to illustrate my point. It's just that, you had cameras rolling.
Oh, the media.
Some of the media
filmed
was
it?
there. Well, I don't even film it, but I know they were there. And the family was there, and the kid was there, and they had promised this kid they were going to fly. So I understand the pressure under which the general was, but I also understood that I had a mission briefing that literally I could be shot down because I'm not the guy with the codes. And
You were doing your job.
also knowing that I have a hint of an accent. You don't want to have an aircraft with a person with a foreign accent telling that they're flying to the Statue of Liberty because terrorism, as I said, has been alive forever. So I didn't want to create a situation that we could be shut down just because I didn't say no to the general. So I did what I felt I needed to do at the time, and thank God it didn't backfire. And we're still here having this conversation.
What did your buddies say afterwards about it?
Which buddy? The crew?
At work, yeah.
Nothing.
No one said anything?
Well, other than you have a big mouth and you should have known better, but I would have done the same thing type of thing. So.
No one teased you about it or anything?
No, because it wasn't publicized, but the chain of command knew about it, and I had done other things already in public that people knew I had a big mouth, for lack of a better term, and I had a habit of saying things people didn't want to hear or needed to hear, but maybe not necessarily wanted to hear. So it came as no surprise that I told the general that I couldn't do that.
Did you ever
part.
see him again?
Yeah, I did. I don't know if you remember me or not, but the first time that he might have heard my name was he had an officer's call in 1982, just around right after I got back from flight school at the War Memorial before it was rebuilt. And I can't say it was the first officer call, but it was definitely the first officer call that many of us had been involved with. These older officers that were in at the time, and the young bucks like me. I was just a first lieutenant back then. And at that occasion, back in 1982, there were some issues raised. He opened the floor, and so our officers started to ask questions. And there was a minority officer that asked a question that I thought was really stupid. And I did not mind the officer asking the question. I felt, I want to say, offended, or I objected to the way that the senior leadership was curling around to try to appease this person that was asking a question that had no place in there. So eventually I got a hold of the mic and I went on a 2-minute rant about, bullets don't care whether you're a minority or not, you know your job or you don't know your job type of thing. And that's it. I'm a first lieutenant, and I fly aircraft, and this is what that person asks has nothing to do whether you can do your job. If you're not getting promoted, it's because maybe you're not worth it type of thing.
Right.
So I went into that rant, and the fact that you're a minority doesn't really mean anything to the aircraft when it breaks, or the bullet that's going to kill you, or the enemy. You're representing the United States type of thing. And after I stopped, there was a very pregnant pause, and then everybody started clapping. And some folks to this day rate me about that. So,
okay.
so yeah, he may not have tied the two persons together, but he definitely knew that Captain Martinez had a big mouth at some point in his life. And God rest his soul.
You speak your mind.
Well, we get paid to protect the nation, and if you have to go against the grain, you have to say what you got to say.
That's right. You can't roll over, especially when it's a safety issue.
We get paid to make decisions and say what needs to be said. And this is the land of the free, and there's a First Amendment, and I'll learn to use it quite well.
That's true. I love it.
So anyway.
So that's the only day that you were at Liberty Weekend, the 4th of July?
Well, that was the only day that the event happened. So there was some cleanup afterwards.
The next day was 800,000 people, record-breaking, the largest audience in the world at Central Park. There was a concert.
Right, yeah, but see, what happens is, as it happened after 9/11, that became a New York National Guard responsibility, because it was happening in New York, since the Statue of Liberty is involved both states.
Oh,
So, yes.
now I understand.
Just like it happened during the Republican National Convention back in 2010. The convention happened in Democratic National Convention, I think it was in New York City in 2010, and the New York Guard was given all the money in all the command and control. New Jersey was kind of, we participated, but we were not included in some of the situations. And as aviation person at the time, I sat on a few meetings. I started asking questions. So what are we going to do with the overflow people trying to come over the bridge? And no one, I'm sure somebody thought of it, but it hadn't been articulated. And then there were some other discussions that evolved from there. So what the bottom line was, and see what's happening in New York. The New York Guard had primary assignment, but the Central Park issue, that was a primary responsibility. But the 4th of July was basically a multi-state event. So as a result of that, we had the better back responsibility because we were supporting the New Jersey State Police. And I'm sure New York might have had a similar thing on Roosevelt Island and everything else, but that was New York Guard. So.
And then the closing ceremonies were at Giant Stadium?
I didn't participate on that. They didn't have any. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. It was just the 4th of July proper that I was there.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, continuing on then, 86.
Well, 86, that's when the Army of Excellence became into effect.
Yes. I'm sorry. So you went to Fort Hood, and then when you came back, where were you?
We came back, we remained in the same unit. We supported the 4th of July action, continued to fly and prepare.
Westfield and Picatinny?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And we pretty much were preparing for this new force structure that was coming in place in October 1st of 1986. As that happened, the unit, I was projected to be the Delta D Troop Aviation became 2 units, became Charlie Troop and Delta Troop. But the part of the organization involved dismantling this whole organization that had a very good setup. But the new doctrine said that we were basically pure flight units. So all we had was, we went from 201 soldiers to 35 soldiers. And we were basically 10 aircraft with 10 crews and then a couple of extra people. That's a supply person, an admin person, I think, and I forget. So there was 35 people total. So what happened was, there was the unit became basically a very small company, and then all the other extra personnel became part of the headquarters troop and in the squadron itself. So the service platoon that maintained the aircraft became part of another unit. The infantry guys got integrated into the ground units, and our mission scope was reduced significantly to just aviation air surveillance. And there was supposed to be attack aircraft and scout aircraft, no lift capabilities. We couldn't fly anybody anywhere. And we only had one Huey left, that was the maintenance aircraft, to ensure that if an airplane broke down, we would fly a team up there to recover the aircraft and bring it back. So the commander of the unit would be a captain, just like the ground units used to be and were, and the platoon leaders would be lieutenants. There would be no majors. So that structure came into effect 1 October, and we still had we were able to get an orderly room. The troop headquarters got moved to Picatinny somewhere around that time frame in a small house inside the arsenal proper, about a mile from where the aircraft were kept. These squadron headquarters remained in Westfield, and then we were. Yeah, again, as a commander, I would go to Picatinny in the morning, get everybody flying. If I had a chance, I would do my flight, because everyone has to maintain proficiency, commander included. And then I would drive to Westfield for meetings and things like that, or come back to Picatinny the following day. I kind of do it all over again. Very stressful times, because there was a lot of personnel turmoil. Some of the folks were qualified for the new positions, some were not. Some could go to school, some could not. We still were expected to provide response to the state as far as aviation in case of emergencies. And even though we had smaller aircraft, we still had the old aircraft there that needed to be maintained and flown. So while we were waiting on the transition to the new aircraft for the pilots, we were keeping their proficiency with the old aircraft. And at the state, within the state, there were different schools of thoughts. Well, we're not touching that aircraft versus we're flying the aircraft. And as a captain, you just want to watch the ball being passed from one place to the other. Meanwhile, you gotta fly you guys. So that became a lot. And then folks were wondering about whether they were going to be able to go to school, take the time off their jobs, or whether they were going to be out of the guard altogether. And we only had a few people leave because all the related things and the fact that they didn't want to fly attack aircraft, they wanted to fly left or scout, and there were only so many slots. So we lost some people, but we were able to keep the unit together and eventually, make things work and towards this. The biggest challenge at the time was that you went from being a self-contained, self-sustaining, self-deploying unit. You became a parasite of your headquarters because you couldn't do anything. You couldn't feed yourself, you couldn't move yourself other than fly the aircraft, you couldn't fix yourself because all those elements that you used to own now were part of another organization. So you had to go through separate chain of command.
More red tape?
Basically. And unfortunately, you'll hear this a lot from non-aviation folks. We're special and we have a lot of requirements, which we do. Which sometimes, even though the commanders were willing to help, they didn't understand why certain things needed to happen at certain times and why we needed immediate response on certain things regarding maintenance. But they were not able to sometimes facilitate the process as well as intended because they didn't understand. So they knew that these people needed to be out of formation at a given time, and they didn't care that the aircraft needed to be inspected before the flew, even though he was going to fly the aircraft later. So that created a lot of stress. But it also helped me, become more effective in making my points as to what certain things needed to be done so I could coordinate the support that I needed to get the job done. So a lot of frustration, a lot of learning. I'm sure some other people felt the same way about me being frustrated because you do what you have to do. And I understood people needed to do their job, but when your job gets in the way of my job, we have to have that conversation. Right. And figure out how to make it work. So not getting the job done is never an option. It's just I work hard to try to make it as painless as possible. So that work, that transition basically lasted a good year, if not a little more. The squadron commander at the time was resentful that the new organization had placed him into a new command that was created as far as a reorganization within the 50th Brigade. An aviation brigade was formed. There was no aviation brigade prior to the Army of Excellence concept. And the fact that we had a squadron commander that was an armored officer or infantry officer working for an aviator was, I guess, a philosophical issue that he had, and he felt by doctrine the cavalry squadron works really directly. Used to, I don't know if it's changed, but I'm pretty sure it's the same way. The cavalry squadron worked directly for the division headquarters for the division, not necessarily. Usually, you're familiar with the structure. You have company, squadron, battalion, then you have brigade and division. Well, the cav always worked supposedly directly for the division. So now this commander felt that he should still be working for the division instead of having to report to some aviator at a brigade level, and that didn't understand what they wanted, even though so that created a lot of friction, a lot of the aviation related issues that came down from the chain of command were usually a point of contention with the squadron commander because he was filtering through some emotional issues that had nothing to do with the issue. So at the time, in the second year of that organization, I came to work as a full-timer at Picatinny, operations officer, and I was getting pulled from the full-time side, trying to convince the part-time side to do chain of command to do this, and likewise, the squadron commander kind of knew that I was working during the week with his nemesis, and I was working for him on the weekend. So him and I had
caught in the middle?
Kind of, yeah. it's life. Yeah, again, it's life. You know, sometimes you get caught between your kids and your wife. You know, it's kind of the same situation. You gotta find a way to make it work. So that was very educational. You know, I learned a lot of what to do or not to do, or how to go about certain things. I was, I'm going to say, chastised by both sides of the house. I was one time or the other, but I think that we managed to get the job done and keep people safe and keep everybody flying, which is what I thought my job was. It worked out pretty well. So that went on until 1989. In 1989, I was, I think, 2.5 years into my command tour. Back then, the command tours were usually 3 years. I was reassigned to go to the aviation brigade headquarters to work in the operations section. And I wasn't happy with the thing because I wanted to finish out my command, and I felt that I needed to stay in the CAV. But the people that were my bosses, basically, I remember Colonel Pierce says, "You're going to be happy that you did this as much as you're upset now." And every time I see him, I remind him that how right he was, because I was able to learn what the rest of the organization was doing, and it really opened up my eyes to a lot of other things. And I think eventually it really helped me grow professionally and personally. Got to work with some of the folks that I only heard of, and I was able to validate a lot of the misperceptions that you create from people that you don't really see, or you only see the results of their actions. So it was good. And I made some very good friends, and I met some great NCOs and some other great officers that I would have missed otherwise. So
Where was that?
well, the aviation headquarters, brigade headquarters, was located in Trenton Mercer Airport, in West Trenton, right at the site where the Army Aviation Facility was. And that's where the headquarters for the 1st of the 150th Aviation Battalion, at that time in 1986, was the Attack Helicopter Battalion, was headquartered. So in the same building you had the battalion headquarters and you had the brigade headquarters there. So that kind of tight space, but it worked out really well. So I was in the Aviation Brigade 3 section I was a liaison officer, I guess. I think that's what my title was within the operations section. I got to do a lot of different things, working with outside officers of other companies and brigades. And also internally, I ended up writing several procedures that became the state procedures for certain things. Aircrew training program, or the model, not necessarily the template. I helped write the template that, to a certain degree, I think is still being used today in certain things. Because so I got to learn a lot. And the gunnery procedure, I was able to combine all these gunnery training and gunnery procedures that were in existence from the cavalry and the attack battalion, and made one document that was able to be used by everybody. So if you had a pilot that was coming out of the CAV, going into the attack battalion, they were working with the same processes to achieve the Army standard, and vice versa. So that was something that hadn't happened before, so I was able to participate with that. And Colonel Retired Barry Billman was the operations officer at the time. Brilliant man, allowed me to do this, so I learned a lot. And then I was there for, again, that was going to be a 3-year tour, but then the maintenance company up at Picatinny that was assigned to support the entire state aviation-wise, their commander had changed, and they put someone in charge, but they needed someone to help with run the company. Not an executive officer, but like an operations guy. So I was reassigned from the battalion to F Company, and the plan was at the time that I was going to be the operations officer for F Company, and then I was going to get promoted to major and be the company commander. And that was all working fine until the executive officer, until the commander of the 1st of the 150th Aviation decided to take a job with the state. Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Mancella. He went to work for State Treasury Department or full-time or something. Bottom line is he left the National Guard. So Lieutenant Colonel retired Russell Cialpi, the executive officer, became the commander. I needed an executive officer. So Martinez knows how to spell aviation, bring him out of the maintenance company back to Trenton, to be the executive officer for 1st of the 150th Aviation. And that was in March of 92, around the late winter, early spring of March of 1992. And then the plan was going to be, you're going to be the XO, and chances are when Russell Sharpie rotates and you get qualified in attack aircraft, you become the unit commander. Works. So I went back to Trenton. I became the XO. We went to AP Hill, Virginia for the annual training that year. We did everything we needed to do. We came back. The unit was, running pretty well. And then the division commander at the time, General Snyder, Major General Snyder, might be. I don't remember exactly. I think that was his name. He used to be the school superintendent in Fair Lawn High School in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. I do remember that because that was the town next to where I grew up. So anyway, the general decided that Major Glenn Reith, was going to be the new battalion commander because he was happy with what Russell Shepard was doing, but he felt more comfortable with General Reith. So General Reith came into the 1st of the 150th as the commander in September of 1992. And while that was going on, the executive officer, I know it's a soap opera, but the executive officer of the 5th of the 117th Cavalry, which is supposed to be an aviator under the new structure, left. So since I had been in the cavalry squadron before, and I was an aviator, and Reith wanted to bring his own team, I was reassigned from the 1st of the 150th executive officer to the executive officer position at the 5th of the 117th back in Westfield, New Jersey. And working for Lieutenant Colonel Rush, that was an armor officer previously from the 1st of the 102nd Tank or 2nd of the 102nd Tank out in Port Mary, New Jersey, and I worked for him for a couple of years, and that was another educational experience, working for someone that brilliant person, great officer that had no empathy or understanding or desire to learn about aviation. So that became another challenge, and an interesting couple of years where I got to learn a lot more about how to deal with divergent opinions and obey the chain of command and express my point and keep everybody safe. So that worked out. That was also a great experience. I was there from 92 through I think 94, give or take, which is the time when decision was made. Around that time, because that's around the time that the division disappeared, the 50th Armored Division, the old Quicksilver message that came through that we disbanded many National Guard divisions came into effect, and the 50th Armored Division went away, and everybody got reassigned to the 42nd Infantry Division headquartered in New York. So I'm fuzzy on the details here, but I do know that in that transition during Colonel Rush's tenure, we ended up that after his command, the unit moved from Westfield to Vineland. Okay, and I think it was somewhere around 1994. I have to recheck my notes because at that time, again, that was another major organizational shift, because now that we didn't have a division, we had excess officers and who goes where type of thing. I can tell you that I do know that Lieutenant Colonel Rush was not happy about being in the CAF. He didn't like the CAF mission. He wanted to be the 102nd commander, and it ended up that he also had some issues at home eventually, that basically he ended up retiring from the National Guard towards the end of his command assignment. And as the unit and the organization evolved, he was the last commander of the 5th of the 117th CAF at Westfield before he moved to Vineland. So during all that transition, I was the executive officer of the squadron until it left for Vineland. Then at that point, I was assigned, I believe, that was when I went back to headquarters Stark, New Jersey, in Lawrenceville at the time.
So you didn't go to Violence?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
I did not. I did not go to Violent for a number of reasons. One of them is that Violent is almost 3 hours of drive from my house, and I wasn't going to move. The full-time officer in Violent, I think at the time, was Captain or Major. His name just escaped me. He ended up being one of the squadron commanders, but he is the person that received all the equipment and personnel in Colonel Shute. He received all the personnel and all the administrative duties for the transition in Violent, and they were not going to move him, and it didn't make sense. He's there every day, so why not make him the XO, the operations officer? So if I remember correctly, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson from South Jersey became the first CAF commander at the Violent headquarters. I think Colonel Shute was his either XO or operations officer, and after him, I think it was General Hines, Steve Hines, I think became the commander after Colonel Thompson, and then after Hines, Shute was the commander. So, and I think Colonel Debris retired, became Shute's XO or something along those lines. So when that happened, when the CAV left Westfield, I went back to Joint Force Headquarters in the Aviation Directorate, and I was there as I think it was either initially standardization officer or something having to do with aviation operations. And at that time, Aviation Directorate had the safety program, was also part of the directorate. We had the responsibility for state safety, ground and air. So I got involved in a lot of that. I was already a qualified aviation safety officer from part of my. I went to that course in 1990, if I remember correctly, or 1991, and I worked in that directorate for a while. I'm trying to think right now, but I was there for quite a bit.
Were you there for 9/11?
Yes, I was. I was in 9/11. I was in the Aviation Directorate, but I was also the Army Aviation Facility Commander up at Picatinny, and I run. General Reith was the State Army Aviation Officer when all this happened, and we had the operations center itself was down in Trenton, but Picatinny was kind of the standby site for additional support to New York or New Jersey at the time, so I stayed up at Picatinny, pretty much running Picatinny while everybody else was running it as well. I would provide support. They get the missions. If they were busy, then I would launch the aircraft out of Picatinny to do certain things, and then there were certain missions that would run out of Picatinny while Trenton was taking care of some of the other bigger issues, because they had no aircraft. Were already getting Black Hawks. At the time, Picatinny didn't have any Black Hawks. We were still flying Hueys, because the unit we had at Picatinny was a Huey unit. So Black Hawk being a more capable aircraft, they were being used for the more immediate missions while we were picking up all the backup missions, and that worked out pretty well. So we worked out quite a bit. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned Joint Force Headquarters. Is that Fort Dix?
It is now. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, it is now, but
Stark
it was
became
Lawrence.
Joint Force Headquarters. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right, take me back to 9/11, 2001. What are your memories?
Okay, I was home. I was working the night shift at Picatinny. The aviation facilities run a two-shift operation because the aviation personnel, aviation crews, have requirements to fly a certain number of hours every year, and they have something called currency. You have to fly at least 1 hour of flight time. It used to be 60 days, I think now it's 45 days. Otherwise, you have to fly with an instructor pilot to ensure that you're safe, part of safety programs. So, part of the requirements are that you have to fly so many hours total, so many of those hours have to be nighttime. And sometimes, depends on your assignment, some of those hours have to be on the night vision goggles or under certain type of conditions. The great population of the National Guard has real jobs, so it's not like they can just show up in the morning, get on an aircraft and fly sometimes. And the number of hours that are required to be flown each year cannot be achieved if you only show up on a weekend. So Department of Defense created a program called Additional Flight Training Periods, which basically gives you a 4-hour period of time that you get paid for to come in and fly an average of at least an hour and a half hours per period, per AFTP, that's what they were called. So the soldiers that had real jobs would leave their job, drive to Picatinny, get on an aircraft and fly during the night. So we had to have operations personnel, instructor pilots, maintenance personnel, and support the operations. So there are all the facilities, Trenton and New Jersey, and Picatinny, New Jersey, and basically all the facilities in the United States had a 2-shift operation. So you would, at Picatinny, we run it that the team would be on night duty for 3 weeks at a time, just to maintain their sleep cycles and so on kind of constant. So that creates a lot of performance issues when you're flying. So my turn, because we were short-staffed, even though I was a commander, I still needed to do my flying, support the program, and be part of the daily operations. So my 3-week shift was during that time period. So I had my mom was taking my mom to the doctor that morning, and I remember being home, and I remember my mom calling me, hey, an aircraft. My mom is an alarmist. So when she told me that an aircraft hit one of the towers, she heard that on the Spanish radio. I said, hey, Mom, don't worry. Most likely it's a small plane. Let me see what's going on. So I'm trying to appease her because she's older, and she was already old. Yeah, she just turned 98 last week, so she's been around, yes. So I went, hey, Mom, don't worry about it. Most likely something small. Let me see what's going on. So I hung up. I was actually working my computer, ordering a calendar for next year, so I could keep track of my things. I didn't remember that vividly. So I got off the computer, turned on the TV, and I see the smoke. I said, that looks like bigger than something much bigger than a small airplane. And I was watching CBS News, and it happens that, remember that fellow I told you that was with the news helicopter during Floyd?
Oh, okay.
Well, he's flying the morning for CBS News, and the reporter on the air is talking about trying to explain the air structure and why that airplane shouldn't have been in that area of the airspace. So he says, well, my pilot, Ed Baker, is here. So Ed started to talk about why the aircraft shouldn't have been there when the second aircraft comes in. And I said, oh my God. So for some reason, your mind works funny. I realized what was going on, and I'm trying to get in touch with people, and I'm not reaching anybody.
Right.
So I said, okay, one of those mental lapses that you have. I said, okay, let me take my mom to the doctor real quick, and let me go to Picatinny. So while I'm thinking of that, it took me like 35-40 minutes. And my mom I called the doctor, and the doctor is stuck in the bridge because he can't come from Manhattan.
Oh, right.
Then I realized, it's funny how the mind works. You're seeing all these things, and your mind is not accepting what's going on. Then I realized, the doctor can't get in. The 2 towers, they hadn't fallen down yet.
Right.
And I can't get anybody on the phone yet. So I said, maybe I should pack a bag. So I threw all my stuff in there. And while I'm doing this, the towers collapsed. So I said, well, I think I need to go to Picatinny like right now. So I called my wife. I called my wife's school. She worked in Hudson County. And actually, from her school, a lot of the kids actually saw the planes hit the towers. So I said, hey, I got to go to work. I'll see you in a few days. So make sure the kids get picked up from school. And I went to Picatinny. I got there maybe, I'm going to say, just before lunch by the time I got there. And hardly any communications with Trent because everybody was all over the place. So I called my boss at that time, Colonel Reed, and say, hey, sir, I'm here. I got this. I got people calling. I'm bringing people in just in case. Let me know what you need. So I was there for about 3-4 days straight. I don't remember. And then we got worried because one of the airplanes, our crew chiefs was supposed to be in one of the airplanes. We thought was in one of the airplanes. So he worked at Picatinny Arsenal, and somebody said, hey, Minisi is supposed to be flying out this morning, and we can't reach him. So we're like, oh my God, you know. And I mean, everybody else is calling, hey, what do we need? So I started kind of lining up crews. I said, get 3 aircraft ready to go, get the weapons, because I didn't know what was going on. Get the weapons out of the arsenal, but that's where we kept the door guns for the aircraft. Called the security company that guarded the facility because we had weapons for the aircraft in there. I told them to send somebody right away because they were only there at night. I said, you need to get someone here because I'm not sure what's going on. So, and then the arsenal, since we were tenants in the arsenal, we're getting calls from the arsenal command post. What's going on? What are you guys going to do? Blah, blah, blah. I said, well, you know, one of those, I'm here to help. I'm standing by, but remember that I don't work for you. I'm just your tenant. But if something happens, I got aircraft ready to go. I just have to, if you need something, I just have to let my boss know what we're doing so they know what we're involved. I really can't commit anything to you because I have to ensure that my headquarters, their needs are taken care of first right now. You know, we're so far removed from Manhattan that there is no immediate emergency for us. So I have to ensure that I have staff capable to respond. Because at that point, you didn't know whether there was going to be another attack or how things happen, or whether there were people that were getting ready to attack, do another attack, or weapons or whatever in the area. So we were, you know, we didn't know because we didn't know. So I remember everybody calling and everybody showing up ready to go. So I basically said, okay, this is what we're going to do. While we wait, let's make sure that we have 3 crews ready to go, and a second set of 3 crews after that, and make sure that whatever aircraft we have that can be ready to go, it's ready. We waited, and then we started, you know, it started to support. Things became more clear, and the entire state, everybody started to coordinate effort, and then we knew what we needed to do. I didn't have to put the weapons on the aircraft because then it was, you know, established that there wasn't any follow-on threat to anything, and then we started to set up the continuous 24-hour operations to ensure that we were able to support. And aviation became quite involved in it, especially the guys from Trenton, because the FBI needed aviation support, and for some reason their crews couldn't do some of the things that the evidence recovery teams needed done. Oh. So they asked the state police asked us, and then mostly the guys from Trenton, Chieftain Hartog, Chief Poliak, Colonel Derry retired, Colonel retired Scannell, that was a Picatinny that I sent to Trenton to help the effort, and a few other folks that were there engaged more so than I was because I was holding the fort at Picatinny, and ended up flying the FBI teams, recovery teams, where they needed to be most of the time, and we established a very good relationship. A lot of that synergy had been set up by now Colonel retired John Sheard, because he was the counter-drug coordinator for the state, and he had been working with the state police and the FBI in a number of counter-drug missions for a few years. So when the attack occurred, there was already an existing relationship, and we knew each other's capabilities, we knew most of the key personnel, so it became, I would say, a natural progression that we would handle some of that stuff since we had the aircraft and the capabilities while they were taking care of the state police aircraft, and was taking care of other things that they could do, that we could do without hindering their capabilities. So we as in New Jersey Army Aviation, not me personally, ended up flying a significant amount of missions for the FBI that enabled them to establish a lot of intelligence information that they needed. And to the point that, remember the anthrax attacks that occurred in Princeton and so on, our crews from New Jersey were the ones that flew the samples to Fort Monroe, Virginia, to be analyzed, because we could, and the FBI for some reason couldn't execute it. So the FBI folks got in our aircraft and our crews flew in there and got all that stuff going. So that was interesting times. I wasn't there personally, but I do know everybody that got involved, and I knew what was going on. And while they were doing other things, we ended up flying a few flights and so on. So it was good. It was good from the perspective that we were able to support the response and help other agencies establish what was really going on, the nature of the attack, and all the other things that occurred that got us involved into the war against terrorism. So
Right.
I was, and the response of the folks, everybody. We found out that our crew chief was not on their flights. He had been in the flight that left slightly earlier. So
Okay.
yeah, so thank God he was safe. And he was able to come back and help us on some of the follow-on missions and so on. So it worked out. And then after that, it's snowballed. The immediate response to the starting the war in Afghanistan, to the evolution into Iraq, and everybody changing their National Guard, transforming itself from a strategic reserve to becoming an operational force. At some point, we were, I think, 57% of the forces in theater. So I was able to contribute or participate in the evolution of the Guard, becoming the force that should have been all along, and validating the capabilities and providing the expertise, equipment, and capabilities that people that have a real life and participate in the military can only provide, which is one of the shortcomings of being in active duty. When you have a flight surgeon or a pilot that happens to be a surgeon on the outside, you have, and something happens, you have a person there that brings a set of skills that the Army couldn't put together, even if they tried.
Oh, okay.
Firemen, policemen.
That's true. Yeah.
We validated our value without doubt, thousandfold throughout the years of the war, in every aspect. Good, bad, and indifferent. We also learned some things about ourselves that we needed to change, and I think we've done a good job of doing it. And we learned to police ourselves a lot better to ensure that we have a force that can do what we're supposed to do. So, positive.
Well said.
Thank you.
I jumped the gun a little bit. Let's go back to 1999. Where were you then? September?
1999 September. I think I was still in Joint Force Headquarters or Headquarters Stark at the time.
Once in a few centuries event. The worst flood in the Raritan River history. 42-foot crest. The largest call-up of New Jersey National Guard in 30 years, since 1969. Tropical Storm Floyd.
Yes, dear friend. Tropical Storm Floyd. We learned a lot in Tropical Storm Floyd that allow us to be that much more effective after 9/11.
Okay.
From the operational side, again, being at Picatinny, we were closer. We were not closer, but we were able to respond fairly fast. We were faster in responding to what we were asked to do than the communications asking us to respond were. We knew there was a fire and we knew there was a flood. I think 3 hours before we received the mission to go and support, which is one of the things that we learned, that the lines of communication were not as effective as they should have been. We went to work. We knew there was a flood, and we knew that the storm was coming, and we had a possibility of having to respond to a couple of emergencies. But at the original focus was it was going to happen down south, and everything, the storm kind of deviated and went inland, and that's where everything. So the morning of, I don't remember the actual dates, but the morning that kicked off the entire operation for us, we got to work. We knew the weather was bad. So our focus was have the aircraft ready for as soon as the weather lets up. We know we're going to have to most likely move people around and do. We were doing a lot of aerial reconnaissance to advise the state police and where the floods were and so on, because a lot of the roads we were expecting some of the roads not to be there. So anyway, we get to work. We're ready to go. The wind is howling, and we're watching the news that all this flooding is happening, and I'm calling Trenton, my aviation headquarters, to find out what's going on. And we're going to fax you some status reports to see what's going on. We need to know what aircraft you have. I already gave you guys all that information already. Right. So it ended up that we had already done the preparation. We had something called Bambi buckets, which are basically for forest fires or fires. That it's a big bucket that you fold and you put inside the aircraft, and then you can take it out and put it underneath the aircraft and go get water and drop the water over the fire. And we had done some of that as training because we were able to get, we were fire support for Picatinny Arsenal whenever they had an issue with her, and we had done some of that work already. And we had certain crews that were qualified to use the bucket because that's additional training. So, sometime mid-morning, late morning actually, on the date of the storm, we get a call that we need to go to Somerset Armory because that became the operations center for the Guard to support the emergency because it was closest to the area. Mm-hmm. So we knew at the time that the Trenton guys, one of the Blackhawks, they had just received the Blackhawks. They had received a medevac unit at the time, and they had Blackhawks that was part of the package for them. And they were transitioning into Blackhawks before everybody else. That Governor Whitman and General Glazer, Major General Glazer, the adjutant at the time, most likely were going to be in a Blackhawk flying up to Somerset to monitor the situation, find out what's going on. And,
during the storm?
Well, yeah, right after, like the morning after. The winds were still pretty high, but it wasn't raining. And I would say this must have been like the day after all the rain and stuff. So this is, I know the weather was fine, but other than turbulence and winds, because the winds were outside of the scope for Hueys to be able to start. I do remember that because that's what I was flying. So we knew that the Adjutant General was going to be there with the governor most likely, and aviation wanted to have a couple of aircraft ready to go. The Blackhawk they had, plus a Huey in case we needed something, and since there was a fire, to make sure that we brought our Bambi bucket with us. Roger. So we eventually, the winds got a little better. I remember us positioning the aircraft within our airfield in an area that was partially blocked. We partially blocked the wind so we could get the aircraft started because the winds were in excess of what the book says. So we knew that the aircraft could start. We just didn't want to break anything. So we were able to get it in a spot that we could start safely, not violate anything. And then we flew from Picatinny to Somerset, landed at Somerset, went to the operations center, met with my boss at the time. Who was he, SAO? Might have been Colonel Smith, Mike Smith. I don't remember right now. I do know that, yeah, that's what it was. There was no aviation senior officer there. It was the crew that flew, the Adjutant General and the Governor, but the Colonel was in Trenton at the Emergency Operations Center. So I ended up walking in to the Op Center, and then I get a call that I need to go see General Glazer. And I go see the General, and this General Glazer with Governor Whitman. And okay, what do you guys got? Well, this is what we have. We have, Huey with bucket, and this is what we can or can't do right now. Turbulence is kind of high. I'm not sure. So Governor Whitman pretty much says you need to put, I can't have the New York Police Department putting out New Jersey fires when we have the capabilities here. So you need to put some water on that fire. So
the governor said that to you?
Yeah, and the general says, can you do that? I said, well, sir, I said, we can definitely give it a shot. There's certain things going on, but we can definitely do it. So I said, okay, so make it happen. Yes, sir. The crew for that flight was the fellow that I was working with. It's that gentleman I'll tell you that I still have dinner with, Mr. Smith, Vietnam vet, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
The guy that I worked for, worked with me, him and I were the pilots. And I think Sergeant Bobby Kelch was the crew chief, and Sergeant Wisma may or may not have been with us. I really don't remember right now. I have to check my notes. But we all worked together at Picatinny, and we were, So we get the bucket ready. We get all ready to go. We depart Somerset. We fly towards where the fire, and when we get there, the winds were howling pretty bad.
Where was the fire?
It's the Harley Davidson dealer in what was that? Brook? Oh my God! Where the floods were?
Bridgewater?
South of Bridgewater, Brook something or other. Now I can't. Oh my God! I'm gonna have to look that.
Bound Brook.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. That was a big one, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So we, as we fly towards Bound Brook, we see a couple of other helicopters in the area, and one of them is a CBS helicopter with Mr. Ed Baker, the guy that was at the...
You have friends in the air, too.
Right, and we flew always sixes to it. So one of the things that happened that became a glaring issue was we in the aircraft didn't have the capability to speak with the firemen on the ground or the police because the radios are not compatible.
Just like 9/11. Right.
So we were trying to find out what was going on. Well, Mr. Baker, knowing that we have a radio that is compatible with his radio, said, hey, this is what's going on. New York PD just did a couple of passes. The place is in ruins. There's nothing to save here. So I said, Roger, well, I got to put water on that fire. So he said, I got it. So he says, you do me a favor, just let he had communications with the ground people. So he communicated to the fire, the incident commander, the fire folks on the ground that Hugh was going to get some water and make it pass. And they said, Roger, says there isn't much to do, but let's see what we can do. So while that's going on, we're looking for a place to get water, and the river was raging, so the currents were really strong. And our concern was two things: the current is too strong, and number two, there's so much debris there. If we get caught in debris and we get pulled down, then we're going to have a flood and a crash, and then we can't do what we're supposed to.
Right.
So Mr. Smith, being the more experienced pilot, says, let's do this. Just go out, and we looked for places that were already flooded, but that didn't have that were basically the water was less either stationary or just not as strong. So we found a couple of corporate parks that looked like likely targets. We went in there, we dipped our bucket, we filled it up, picked it up, and then we flew. And the winds were howling. I do remember that we could only approach from one direction because the way the winds were. So we had fall. There was a set of power lines that were right by nearby the burning building, and we followed the power line, but we couldn't be as low as we wanted because we had the bucket hangs like 30 feet underneath the aircraft, so you don't want the bucket to get tangled on the wires. So Sergeant Kelch and I think maybe Sergeant Wursma were keeping us, hey, you're clear of the wires, you're okay, go left, go right type of thing, because we could see that the helicopter was clear of the wires, but we didn't know where the bucket was. So eventually we got by where the building was. We made a left turn. We dropped it as close as we could, but we couldn't get as low as we could because it wasn't enough distance between the power lines and the building for us to drop where we needed to be. So we were a little higher than we could have been. And the winds were howling, so the minute the water came out, it kind of got dispersed in the wrong direction. And a lot of it landed on the tugboat that was trying to direct things. So Mr. Baker said something to the effect, hey, you got everybody wet, but they don't really think you need to make another pass because there isn't really anything to save. So I said, Roger. So I turned around, we flew back to Somerset, I landed, and then I reported back to General Glazer and the governor, and said, thanks a lot. Is there anything else you guys could do? I said, no, ma'am, the fire commander pretty much said that the building there's nothing to save. So I says, well, you didn't make it pass. I says, yes, ma'am, we did. And then they were, says, okay, so can you start, can you guys stay here? I said, sir, we're here for as long as it takes. Just let us know what you need. And then after that, they had all the things to do, obviously, because there was so much going on. Mm-hmm. They left on the black walk, and then what we did, if I remember correct, I think we hung around for a couple of hours to ensure there were no other fires or anything. And then we picked up, went back to Picatinny, and we basically remained on standby for the rest of that day. And then the next day, when the winds calmed down and everything was starting to settle, and we knew we needed to react to a few things. On the ground side, there were soldiers all over the place already. Mm-hmm. But within the next 3-4 days, we started to do almost regular flights between Picatinny to Somerset, Somerset to Teaneck to whatever. Because we needed to move, we were moving personnel that were helping with the logistics and the operations, and because of the floodings and the roads, they wanted to have the capability of just getting there as quick as possible. So I'm not exactly sure how many days straight we ended up flying, but it turned out pretty well. The one thing that was very unique about that period of time for us as aviation person is that because of the state emergency, we were able to fly lower than we usually did. So that became not an incentive, but something nice, because you like to fly a little closer to the ground than you have to. So we were able to fly lower and keep the doors open for the personnel in the back to assess damage and everything else. So everybody was able to have a real good view of what's going on. And I remember, flying between Somerset and Teaneck, because Teaneck was kind of the center of a lot of the logistic efforts, because that's where the main support battalion used to be at the time. And they had a lot of the equipment and personnel and logistical capability that we needed to coordinate with other states, with other agencies. So we got to fly a lot of that. So like on the flight side, it was good. We were able to fly right into, I think it was Banbrook High School's football field. I think they were based out of there. I remember the ground being the turf being still pretty soaked with water, but we landed there quite a few times. And then after things got stable, every once in a while we asked to send an 086 out, or a smaller aircraft to go. It was 98. No, we didn't have the 086s. It was just Hueys out to look for flooding and see how things were from the air and validate the information that we're getting from the ground with what we were seeing from the air. So
this was weeks. This was September 15th to October 5th.
Pretty much, yes, ma'am.
You mentioned a lot of soldiers were on the ground. There were 1,800 National Guard members who were used for this, and also 266 missions.
That sounds about right. On the 266 missions, I remember specifically, and it's just how things turned out. Now that you mentioned that, the aviation folks in Trenton, a lot of them had drilled that weekend, and a lot of them got pulled from the Western Armory to go to state to Trenton, because Route 29 was getting flooded, and they were helping fill sandbags and so on to avoid. So they were one of the reasons that Picatinny got a lot involved into some of the flights, is because most of the folks in Trenton, number one, they didn't have as many Hueys as we did, and number two, they were already assigned to do groundwork. And at some point, I remember Colonel Servo, Paul Servo, I think was the SAO at the time, or the battalion commander. I remember him being told to send ground troops to Boundbrook to control the ground, initially to do ground operations for traffic control points and so on. And some of the questions that we had as soon as the initial reaction went, why are we having the aviation guys that we need to fix aircraft to keep the mission going, sitting at the traffic control point when I need people to fix aircraft? So eventually that progressed, but he spent, I'm going to say, close to a week before his unit was relieved. And then, firstly the 114th and secondly the 115th Infantry. I don't remember exactly which ground units were contributing, but I know there were a lot of the brigade folks came in and remained on station doing all the traffic control. And then those guys from the aviation side, a handful of us, the big effort was the ground people. They really did the critical. And the folks from DISCOM, the logistical command, they helped distribute the water. From aviation on our side, we were able to move their key personnel where they needed to be. No, we didn't move the pilots because the Hueys don't have that much payload capability. But we were able to help DISCOM have their people in place to coordinate the effort. So, and we didn't have to do, at that time, we didn't have to do any hoist rescues or anything. Because at the time, we had the capability. And we have key personnel trained just like we did for fighting fires, but there wasn't a need for that at the time. That was not something that we ended up doing. So.
People died, but not as many as
exactly. Nowhere near Karina or Sandy for that effect.
So you mentioned aerial recon damage assessment, executed evacuations, distributed drinking water, traffic control, debris removal.
Yeah, but that was mostly the ground side. We just moved we moved key personnel around. But yes, ma'am, that was all part of the entire mission. Yeah, we as aviation.
What about hazardous materials?
We might.
Did you come up against anything?
No, we did not. We did not. Because we were flying. And we were flying from point A to point B.
Like no barrels of chemicals were floating down your...
Yeah, I didn't see any myself, but I did see the reports. And I do know that I do know that they had environmental people involved, but I don't know if any from the Army Guard or the Air Force, Air Guard were involved.
okay.
That I cannot really validate, but I do know that I remember hearing it in the news, and I also remember seeing some of the reports where some of the stations were, and that's one of the queries they had with all the ground troops that were waiting in some of this water, whether there were anything in there that would hurt them later, so, yeah.
So did you witness like homes that were lifted off their foundations?
No, I saw a lot of flooded homes, but I don't remember seeing anything
Oh,
like
okay.
that. Yes, ma'am.
So the scale of suffering and loss caused by Tropical Storm Floyd was considerably less, owing in part to the actions of the National Guard before, during, and after the storm.
I would say absolutely. Yeah, the ground guys did a fantastic job, and they did what needed to be done to help people out and minimize the damage. Yes, ma'am.
And there were some out-of-control fires in Boundbrook that were impossible to reach, and Manville was completely cut off, and National Guard helicopters did water drops. That's you, right? A resident rescue. National Guard also gave waterborne rescue support. We have boats, National Guard.
The support battalion, I think, had some capability. I'm not aware of that. I can tell you that helicopter-wise, I'm not aware of any rescues per se. Although,
Okay.
you know,
One interesting thing was the AT&T switching center in Rochelle Park.
I remember that.
Help with sandbagging. New Jersey would stand to lose 911 service due to flooding, and Northeast U.S. would lose long-distance service.
That was part of the concerns at the time, and that's why a lot of the guardsmen were deployed to help with some of those efforts. Yes, ma'am. And I think that's one of the reasons that the aviation personnel were, I guess, originally retained, to make sure that the other soldiers could do other things. I wasn't part of that whole command group at the time. I was just a major, so my piece of the pie was pretty much addressing the aviation report and aviation support to move personnel so they could be where they could do the most effective.
And this catastrophe got flood-prone towns like Boundbrook and Manville to realize the importance of water control.
I would say yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Lessons were learned, like you said earlier.
The biggest lessons I think that were learned, especially, was that in our role as support to the state police and the civilian authorities, we had structures on papers and processes on paper that were okay, that would work, but they didn't prove to be effective. We, for instance, and in my case in point, as I sat in some of these after-action reviews, we could have had an aircraft most likely at the fire site, most likely 2 hours before we were actually made it, because we had the people ready. It's just that the process, how the communication went, took that long.
Right.
And the other thing that became a glaring deficiency across the board is the incompatibility of the equipment. That I couldn't speak to the incident commander on the ground, and he couldn't speak to me to tell me either I don't need you or I need you here, move there.
You needed a news chopper intermediary.
We need yeah, exactly. And I just happened by chance, it just happened to be that the person that was in that aircraft knew us and was part of our organization, so he knew what frequencies to use.
Small world. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. You know, we were able, God puts people in the right place at the right time, I guess, and this is one of those, you know.
I agree.
So, we did, after this, part of that package, we were able to, in aviation side, we were able to procure a couple of radios that were compatible, but they couldn't, you know, they were in a couple of aircraft. And I think we were also received newer rescue hoists to install in the Black Hawks. That was part of the things that we were able to accelerate a little bit. I know the radios went on the Black Hawks because they were in the aircraft of the future. They were called the brand was Wolfsburg radio, I think it was. I don't remember what kind. And we had already used something similar to that in the counter-drug program. So again, the counter-drug program at that time kind of became key because some of those folks had already been working with the state police, so we had some of those line of communications. So communicating with the state police was not as much as an issue or with our command as it was communicating with the incident commander on the ground, which is critical to mission success. So
Another part of that kind of is communicating with the residents, and that turned into reverse dialing notification systems were adopted to let the residents know when to evacuate.
Yes, ma'am. I remember.
Just like with
Yep.
Sandy, not a lot of people
Well, yeah, sometimes you just,
got it. They didn't evacuate.
Sandy, I was already retired, so I know of a lot of the things that I learned from my former aviation mates, some of the things that they saw, because we have participated in, so I learned a lot, but I really didn't experience other than, my hometown, being at home and being thankful that I wasn't facing half the problems that everybody else was facing.
And also, you weren't in during Irene either, the year before.
No, I was already retired.
Already
Yes, ma'am.
retired.
Yeah. But that one I actually was impacted because my son was moving that weekend, and on the way home, we got home. There was no power in my house, and I remember a couple of streets getting off the Garden State Parkway. He moved to Aldbridge, and the trip from Aldbridge to New Jersey to Bloomfield, where I live, was interesting. And then not being able to get to my house from the way we usually do, I have to take like a 3-mile detour because of all the fallen trees and wires. I remember all that and how dark it was. I really didn't contribute anything other than try to take care of my family at the time because I was already out of uniform. So,
okay.
Yes, ma'am. So,
I'm confused.
yeah.
I'm a civilian, but when you're out of uniform, but yet you work SRP?
Okay, that's a
How
great
does that
question.
work?
This is
Okay.
what happens. The company that I work for has a contract. We're under contract with the New Jersey Army National Guard
okay.
Medical Command to support their medical readiness program, which includes setting up here at Seagirt and providing medical support and dental support to the troops. The soldiers have a requirement to undergo a periodic health assessment every year. That's by Army regulation. So after the war, one of the results of the 9/11 war was that this requirement was really not being met because it was always considered that reserve components had their own jobs and their own insurance, so that would be taken care of.
Okay.
And it became a glaring issue during the early deployments that a lot of the folks that were supposed to be deployable were not. And then it was established that the government and DOD have been deficient in supporting the medical needs of the reserve components. So Congress eventually ended up that the law, I guess, was changed so that the National Guard commands. The issue is that a soldier in the National Guard of the Army Reserves cannot utilize military treatment facilities unless they're on active duty. And that's called Title 10 active duty, okay? The National Guard and the Army Reserves train under Title 32 of the U.S. Code of Law, which it's a training kind of status, and it doesn't allow them to benefit from any of the active duty benefits, okay? So, because assumptions were made and because the law doesn't allow certain things, the soldiers in the National Guard and the Reserves were not as medically ready as they should have been when the war started. So as things evolved, it ended up that Congress authorized funding to allow National Guard Bureau, and I'm going to say the Army Reserves, although I'm not very knowledgeable of their situation, to announce, I guess, and have companies like my company bid for service contracts to provide the capabilities for the soldiers to receive all these medical health assessments that they're supposed to have under the control and oversight of the Military Medical Command. So, to make a super long story short, the New Jersey Army National Guard put out a bid. My company won it, and I'm the event manager for the state of New Jersey's contract. I work directly for the state surgeon's office, the New Jersey Army National Guard's Medical Command here at Seagirt, and we provide them with this support so all the soldiers in the Army National Guard of New Jersey receive their periodic health assessment every year, and they get the dental exams, and also if they need any dental treatment that we provide, we treat them. We fix their cavities, do root canals, extractions, etc., so they can meet Army standards for deployability. So we come here every month, just like drill, set up a clinic in Building 35. We use this room that we're using here today as a holding area for the hearing tests. We use several buildings here. I bring a staff of about 100 civilians that include up to 13 doctors or nurses or physician assistants, 13 dentists, 2 hearing conservationists, one audiologist, 1 optometrist, and then medical and dental assistants to support all those things. We process as many as 400 soldiers on any given day, and we come here usually on Thursday or Friday, set up the buildings after all the customers, all the cadets and students here vacate the premises. We run the event for 2 days, usually on a weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and then Sunday night we tear everything down, put it away, and then we come back and do it next month. That's how just happens that I'm a retired military person from the Jersey Guard, and my unit, my company won the bid for the services, and since I knew the folks again, and I was familiar with the organization, and I had been involved in deploying most of the Jersey soldiers in my other capacities in the Jersey Guard during the later part of my career.
Yeah, we need to get to that too.
Yeah, I don't know if we can do that today because I'm supposed to be on a phone call right now. So
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay, it's okay, it's all good. We can, but that's how we got it. And what we do here in New Jersey for the medical command, we have right now similar contracts with about another 9 or 10 states. We do California, we do New York, California and Texas, we do in Kansas, and North Carolina and Florida. We do the same thing we do in New Jersey. And then other states like Delaware, New York, Maine and Massachusetts, we also do medical. We do dental support only. So I guess the good thing about the job is that it allows me to continue to be engaged servicing soldiers, and I'm getting paid for it, which is okay. That way everybody needs a job, so I'm going to have a job that actually does something good for somebody, and I get to see a lot of the folks that I served with for a long time and watch them make rank and grow old gracefully and do well with their families. So it's all pretty
Beautiful.
good. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this is the end of part 1,
Okay.
and Colonel Martinez, I just want to say that I'm honored and humbled that you came today to speak to me of your sacrifice and contribution that you made in service to your country.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm looking for part number 2. Thank you very much.
I am too.
Take care, ma'am.
You too.